All right, open up to Esther chapter 7. So we had a week off last week with spring break. Tonight we're going to be in Esther 7 and 8. And next week we will finish Esther. We'll cover chapters 9 and 10. Okay. And so just a short recap to remind everyone where we're at, where we left off in chapter 6. In chapter 6, it starts with the king honoring Mordecai. If you remember, the king had read about Mordecai, that he had discovered a plot against the king, and he had reported the plot, and in doing so, he saved the king's life. The king had read that, and he decided to honor Mordecai. And as Haman's coming in with these grand schemes to hang Mordecai, the king says, hey, what should we do? How should we honor the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman's thinking, oh, that's me. And he comes up with this grand scheme. We should parade him around town dressed in the best clothing and let everybody know that the king delights in this guy. And the king tells Haman, okay, get Mordecai and go do exactly what you just said and lead him around town. So Haman has to lead Mordecai around town, praising him. And then it says Haman goes to his house with his head covered in shame. And there's an important thing that happens at the end of chapter 6. He's talking to his wife and his wise men, and they say, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. And then the king's eunuchs come in, and they take Haman to the second banquet, right? And that's an important saying. If he's Jewish, you have no chance. You're going to fall before him. And just as a reminder, in Esther, it covers about 12-year time frame. And from the beginning of chapter 1 to the end of chapter 3, it covers 9 years. But in 4 through 8, it covers about 1 week. And so the time frame is speeding up here. The end of chapter 4, it says she's going to fast and pray for 3 days. And then at the end of her fast, she goes and approaches the king, kind of the climax of the book. How is the king going to handle this? And she decides to go before him. And then she says, come to a banquet today. All right, that was at the end of her fast, beginning of chapter 5, come to a banquet today. She doesn't tell him what she wants. Okay, she says, come back to a banquet tomorrow. And in between that time frame, there's a lot of things happening. The king can't sleep, so he has the records brought in, and he reads about Mordecai. Haman is mad at Mordecai, and so he sets up this big stake to have him impaled on it. Right? And this is where we're at. So she has just ended her fast in chapter 4. She's already had the first banquet in chapter 5, and now this is the second banquet right here. And so let's start in chapter 7, and we'll read verses 1 through 6. It says, so the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, what is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom. It shall be fulfilled. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who dared to do this? And Esther said, a foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Okay? This is an important part of the book right here. This is where everything starts getting hashed out. Okay? And so again, he tells her, even up to half my kingdom. And JJ touched on this. He doesn't literally mean you can ask for half my kingdom. What he means is, I will be gracious. Don't be afraid to ask. I'm going to grant your request. And this is the third time he's told her this. I'll grant your request. And that's important because she's finally going to ask for what she wants. Okay? But we come into this understanding of why things are happening this way. We were wondering earlier, why didn't she just ask in the first banquet? But for some reason, she put it off. Well, there was a sequence of events that needed to happen before she got to this point, for her request and when she reveals Haman to really carry weight, right? And so the king needed to have the sleepless night and read about Mordecai, so he knows the importance of Mordecai. He needs to honor Mordecai, right? Haman is going to be covered in shame, right? So Esther was responsible to act, but who's responsible for this sequence of events that's happening? It's not Esther. Esther doesn't even understand why she didn't ask at the first banquet, right? We didn't really understand when we read it until we get to this part. God is sequencing these events that need to take place. So Esther's responsibility was to do her part. She doesn't know the details of how things will work out. Who's taking care of the details? God's taking care of the details. He's working out the sequence of events. And we need to have an understanding that sometimes we need to have some patience, and we just need to take things at God's speed. We don't need to rush in when we're not supposed to rush in, but we need to move when we need to move and not sit back. Esther's learning, hey, I'm going to move at God's speed because he has a sequence of events that are playing out, and she needs to act at the right time. But that takes wisdom. Takes discernment, right? God is giving her the wisdom and discernment to know when to act. How do we get that? Well, we need to spend time with him. And we need to pray for wisdom, discernment, guidance. And he will give that to us in Acts 16. Paul and a couple other guys are going through Asia. And it says the Spirit stopped them from sharing the word in Asia. Why would he do that? It doesn't necessarily give us an explanation, but then it says, after it says they couldn't speak the word there, it says then they tried to go to this other city, and the Spirit didn't allow them. Why? It seems like they would have good intentions. I'm going to go there and preach the gospel. Spirit doesn't allow them. Why? Then Paul has a dream, and it says, go to Macedonia and preach the gospel. The Spirit held them up and kept them from staying where they shouldn't stay. And in the same way, Esther is getting some wisdom and guidance. We even have a one-up on Esther. We have the Holy Spirit to help guide us. But we have to move at God's speed, not ours, right? He has events that he lets fall into place, right? And we need to move at the time he asks us to move. And then in verse 3, Esther begins her request. And she phrases this really well. She doesn't come in and accuse the king. She actually tries to play it like, hey, this is in your favor. She says things like, if it pleases the king, if I have found favor in your sight. And then she says, let my life be granted me. So she's showing him, I'm in a dire situation. My life is being threatened, and it depends on you, right? Kind of that, hey, I need you to be my hero. She's kind of playing that to him. And she reminds him, I depend on your favor. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just presenting facts. And you make what you see as the best decision. Okay? Remember, Haman did something similar in chapter 3. He wanted to create the edict to annihilate the Jews. And he comes and he says, hey, there's these people, they don't follow our laws. And they don't honor you. And it would really be best for you if you would get rid of them. And I'll do that for you if that's your decision. And what did the king say? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Write the edict. Right? And she's kind of playing the same way. She's playing to the king's favor. She's letting him make the decision, right? But she knows how to present this to him. And she does need to be careful. And she gives him, I'm in a dire situation. We weren't just sold as slaves. Me, your queen, I was sold to be killed. And when she says that word sold, remember back, what did Haman offer the king? He said, I'll give you 10,000 talents of silver. She's reminding him, Haman, you sold us to him. And so she's playing on the words Haman had used. And think of what the king's thinking right now. You ever been in those moments you take in a lot of information, you're trying to decipher what's happening? His wheels are spinning. What's happening? How is this happening in my kingdom? How did I not know about this? The queen's a Jew? I thought she was Persian. Mordecai's a Jew? I just honored him. He doesn't, how do I work this out? Haman is responsible for this? Does the king have responsibility? And he's trying to figure all this information out, but at the same time, He's an absolute monarch. He is not to be questioned. That's why Esther had to be careful how she words this. So if he's absolute, he's seen as a God, he can do no wrong. So the king can't have fault in this. So Esther doesn't word it as if he's had fault. So he's thinking, well, I can't be at fault. Who can we blame here? Right? He needs a scapegoat. That's why it's kind of probably not the best idea to be really close to the king, because if it comes down to him or you, it's going to be you that's getting axed, okay? And in verse 6, this is what he's saying. He's saying, who is he? Where is he? Who dared to do this? And that's where she reveals the plot. She says, a foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. Haman, when he was first invited to the banquets, what did he do? He's gloating. He's boasting to his wife. Look how important I am. Now we see, oh, this is really why Haman was invited, so that Esther could expose him in front of the king. And so she's also saying, hey, king, this guy that you promoted, that you gave all this control to, he's second in your kingdom, he's the one that's at fault. And she doesn't come out and say it, but this is the guy that wrote the edict, and you let him seal it with your ring. So what's the king to do? Hey, but Esther has a lot of tact, and she's very wise in how she presents this to the king. She doesn't blame him. She doesn't accuse him. She just words it in a careful way. She doesn't, notice she doesn't say that Haman didn't know Esther was a Jew when he wrote the edict. He didn't know. Haman's learning this for the first time. Oh, the queen's a Jew. Maybe I should have wrote that into the edict that she would be okay. But she doesn't reveal that to the king. There's some things you can just keep to yourself, right? He doesn't need all the information. Okay? Let's look at 7 through the end of chapter 7. This is where Haman's fate is sealed. And the king arose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on that. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. So think back. King has a short temper. Haman knows this. He's probably seen it in person. And now the king has stormed out in anger because he's mad at Haman. And he knows, I'm out of luck. He can't leave. He wouldn't be allowed to. Who's the one person who may be able to get him a little grace? The queen. But think of the king. He goes out to the garden, and it says he's in a rage, and he's angry, but he's also in a predicament. He's got to weigh things out. I've got to figure out a way to handle this without me being wrong. But think of it. How can he execute his second in command? He's also promised 3 times to grant Esther her wish. That's a predicament. Hey? How can I punish Haman for sending the edict when he stamped it with my seal? I gave it my approval. The king didn't read it. He didn't ask any questions. He should have, but he approved it, and it went throughout the kingdom. But now that edict says that the queen is going to die. That edict also says that Mordecai, the man I honored this morning, is going to die. How do I balance this out, and who can I blame? I need to find a way to take care of this. You ever find yourself in a situation you wonder, how did I get here? And then you wonder a more important question, how do I get out of here? That's what the king's doing. How do I get out of here? How did this happen? I didn't think Haman writing some edict would be that big of a deal, because Haman didn't give him all the details. And the king didn't bother to ask. So now he's in a predicament, and he's thinking, how can I find a way out? And he walks in, and Haman gives him his out. It says Haman is falling at the feet of Esther. There's a tradition, it's not biblical, but there's a tradition that the angel Gabriel was behind Haman and gave him a little shove at just the right moment, okay? So that he fell at the queen's feet. But notice the wording. As Haman was falling on the couch, what did his wife say at the end of chapter 6? If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, right? And now he's literally falling at the feet of Esther. Think of the irony. He starts because he's mad at Mordecai, a Jewish man, and now it's going to end with Haman begging for his life at the feet of a Jewish woman. Okay? It's starting to come full circle for him. And maybe Ahasuerus thought he's actually assaulting the queen. Or maybe he just saw an out. Haman would not have had a right to come within a foot or two of the queen, much less throw himself at her feet on the couch. That alone was worth punishment. So Haman has given the king the out he's looking for, and he's going to take it. Okay? And it says they covered his face. Means it's execution time. Okay? Just like they would cover people's face in execution, that sealed his fate. The guards didn't even have to have Ahasuerus say the word. They knew, and he was no longer worthy to look on the king, so they cover his face, and he is going to be taken right away to be executed. And then it seems that word has gotten around that Haman was going to kill Mordecai. The king didn't know. The poll to have him executed had been put up the night before. Haman was going to come in and ask the king's permission, but somehow Harbona, the eunuch, knows about it, and he throws it out there. Hey, there's a poll set up. He was going to kill Mordecai on it, right? And by the way, just as a reminder, King, Mordecai is the guy who saved your life that you read about. Seems like everybody wants to be on the king's good side right now, right? They're not going to have any mess ups and be caught up with Haman. And what does the king say? Hang him on that. So the poll that was prepared to execute Mordecai is now going to execute Haman. They trade places. But remember in chapter 6, Haman was preparing to be praised himself, and Mordecai took his place in that. Mordecai was honored. Haman gets executed, right? And remember, JJ talked about the way they executed people. It was a pole sharpened into a point, and they would sit you on it, and then they would pull your legs down until the pole would run all the way through you and come out. Not a great way to die. I would also say not a great job to be the one tugging on the legs, pulling them down on the stake, but I don't know how you got that job. It doesn't sound like a great job, okay? But this is Haman's fate. So he goes to the pole. They're gonna execute him. Lots of takeaways here. We could talk about Haman and Mordecai switching places. We could talk about think of the plot for Haman. This was more than just Haman not liking a certain people. This was more than Haman not liking Mordecai. This was part of history where throughout history, Satan is always trying to thwart God's plan. God's plan for salvation would come through the Jewish people. He uses Haman to try to thwart that plan. God doesn't allow that to happen, right? So Haman's going to be hanged on the pole that he designed for Mordecai. In the same way, think of Satan. This plan in Esther doesn't work. He continues to have plans to try to thwart God's plan for salvation. What happens on the cross? It's planned for Jesus' death. Instead, it's switched and it's turned for good, right? So when Jesus is on the cross and he says, "It is finished," it's Satan's downfall. Satan's plan backfires on him. And think of, because of the cross, we now have hope, right? God has a way in his providence and his sovereignty of turning things on its head, just like he did for Haman, right? Turned it for bad, just like he did for the Jews, turned what seemed like an impossible situation to good. He takes what seems like a bad thing and Jesus going to the cross, right? But in reality, now that we know the whole story, we see that that was his plan from the beginning. So the cross was meant to destroy Christ. The cross was meant to destroy, or not the cross, the pole was meant to destroy Mordecai. Instead, it destroys Haman, right? Cross meant to destroy Christ, instead brings us salvation. And as I was reading through chapter 7, I'm not sure why this thought kept coming to me, but this was the takeaway that I personally took from chapter 7, so I'll share it with you. And that's how we live our lives matters. So Haman lives his life in a way that he honors himself, and he sets everything up on earth in a very prideful way, and he does everything that he can to collect for himself. But Haman is an unbeliever, so I don't know that we can necessarily blame him. You can't expect an unbeliever to live like a believer should. But think of it, in his pride, everything is going to be taken from him. There's lots of proverbs that speak on this, how the end will come to the wicked. But as a believer, how we live matters. We have a few sureties in life. God forms us in the womb, right? And then one day we'll stand before him. Those are sureties. If you're a believer, you have the surety of your salvation through the cross. We also have the surety that there are works planned for us that we're to do. And so how we get to the end from beginning to end, it matters. It matters for us. Think of JJ teaching on the crowns we can gain one day. Those are not crowns that somehow we gain salvation, but God does take note of the works we do that have eternal effect. So it matters how we live for us, but more so, it matters how we live for the people around us. Haman leaves a legacy of death and destruction for his family. What kind of legacy do we leave? I want to leave a legacy that says my life honored Christ. Like one day my kids laid me in the ground. When they do that, how I lived up to that point matters. And we need to have that understanding. There are works for us to do, and we need to be getting after it. Okay? Our lives matter, and what we do for eternal things for the kingdom matters. We shouldn't live like Haman only for today, only for this life, right? How we live matters. And as we come into chapter 8, keep in mind that when the king signed that edict, it made it unchangeable, right? According to Persian law. We're going to find that even when it seems unchangeable to man, God, in God's providence, he can make things happen. He can change things. Even the actions of the wicked governor Haman, the actions of a wicked king, they all come under God's providence. They all come under his control, right? But we do have to have a trust in him. And in chapter 8, let's read 1 through 8. This is Esther coming again before King Ahasuerus, again pleading for his favor. And this is on the same day. Chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman and the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. She said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman. They have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. So what happens here in these first eight verses? Well, Haman's entire estate, because he was a criminal, goes to the king. He can do with it as he pleases. Well, he chooses to give it to Esther. Esther will then set Mordecai up in charge of it. And she also goes to the king and says, hey, you know Mordecai, who you read about, who you honored? He's actually my cousin, and he's been raising me. Right? And he gives him his signet ring and essentially lets him take the place of Haman. Okay? And as I was reading this, it's as if Mordecai, the way he has lived his life up to this point, is paying off for him. Right? Think of it, he's lived a life of integrity. He's cared deeply for Esther. He goes to the gate every day. He mourns for the loss of his people. He covers himself in ashcloth. Whenever he finds out about a plan to kill the king, he does the right thing. He goes and reports it and saves the king's life. He urges Esther to act whenever she needs to act. And it's like his integrity is paying off. But who's really responsible for Mordecai being brought up to second in command in the kingdom? The king acted on it, but we know it's really God's providence acting on this. So Mordecai did the right things, but God's favor is all over him, right? And it's God setting him up in this position. And so we look at it and we go, man, good for Mordecai. Right? He's in this powerful position now. But there is a little bit of a danger or a trap here for us to look and go, well, when does it pay off for me? I've done the right thing. I live with integrity. Like, am I going to be honored in the same way that Mordecai is honored here? When is God going to put me in this place of power? But that's a trap. Don't fall into that. Don't think that if I do the right things and I live a life of integrity, that somehow God's going to put me in a place of prominence. That's not a promise we have here. Okay? Don't fall into the trap of thinking, when's that coming for me? Because God has a plan for each of us, and it may not be a big plan where we're in a big, powerful position. It might be, and if he is, he'll use you, but he'll use you in whatever position you're in. So our job is to live a life of integrity and live a life that honors God, regardless of our circumstances or where we're at in life. Okay? Mordecai gets honored in a high position. We may or may not, but at the end of the day, our position on earth is temporary, right? Live in a way that you're going to be honored for eternity, that you'll hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant, regardless of circumstances here on earth. And in verse 3, Esther comes before the king, and it appears that she has to be accepted again, because it says, in verse 4, the king held out the golden scepter. And if you remember back, she was worried, well, if I go before the king and he doesn't accept me, I can be killed. But we read he extended the golden scepter and he accepted her. So it appears, again, she had to ask permission, and she was again taking her life into her hands. And he accepts her. He extends the golden scepter, and she, again, falls at his feet. She weeps. She pleads. She's careful in how she proposes this, because this is the ultimate ask that she had in mind from the beginning. It wasn't just to get rid of Haman. That was a start, but now the Jewish people are still in danger. So this is really her ultimate ask. And she again says, if I have found favor in your sight, if it seems right to you, if I am pleasing in your eyes. And she says, I'm thankful for what you've done, that you've given me the house of Haman. You've executed Haman. You've promoted Mordecai. But how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? She's saying there's still more to be done, and I'm still dependent on you, King. Okay, I'm thankful, but I can't just let it rest right there. Okay? So what does the king do? He does the same thing he did for Haman. Okay, go write an edict. Here's my ring. Seal it. I would think that he would learn better, but he just gives her the same permission. Okay? And so, but think of, he's given her his favor. He's given Mordecai's favor. Now go and take care of it. I guess he didn't want to deal with it. But remember, nothing can be changed. He's already put into law that the Jews could be attacked and all their stuff could be taken on this day. So how do you change something that's unchangeable? Well, in 9 through 14, we look at God makes a way. Verse 9, the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews. So the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. On one day, throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, to the Jews, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urging the king by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. So think when Haman's edict came out, the Jews had 11 months to dread the day of their destruction. This edict now comes out, and they have 8 months to prepare for the day when they can defend themselves. Okay? So the first edict is not taken away, but it is balanced out. Haman's edict says that you can attack the Jews, you can destroy them, kill them, annihilate them, and you can plunder everything that's theirs. Well, Mordecai's edict says the Jews are allowed to defend themselves from anyone who would attack them. And also, the Jews, anyone that attacks the Jews and the Jews kill, the Jews have the right to plunder their goods and take what was theirs. And so it gives the Jews a balanced playing field here. It didn't take away the first edict, but it did allow them to defend themselves and give them a balanced playing field. So Persian law, about 3 months before this, has condemned the Jews, and now Persian law is giving the Jews some protection. Okay? Now, it's important to think about, how does this play out in our lives? We wouldn't see anything like this in America, where certain people could be attacked and killed and it be okay. But we have a law against us. The Old Testament, Ezekiel 18:4, the soul who sins shall die. Right? We're condemned under the law. The New Testament confirms this. All fall short of the glory of God. Right? We also have an enemy. The Jews had an enemy in Haman. We have an enemy in Satan. Okay? But what does God do for us? Well, we talked about it a little at the end of chapter 7. He handled it on the cross. Because the New Testament confirms the law. We all fall short of the glory of God. But then it adds to it. We're all justified freely by the gift of Christ Jesus, right? So God found a way to redeem us, right? How did he make a way? Ahasuerus couldn't take away the previous law. Did God take away the Old Testament law? No, but he fulfilled it, right? And when he fulfilled it, how did he do that? Well, he sent his son to take our punishment. That's why Romans goes on to say, 3:26 says, that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So he's just, he's also our justifier. He didn't take away anything out of the Old Testament law. He fulfilled it completely. Right? Colossians 2:13 through 15. And you who were dead in your trespasses and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. The legal demands that were against us in the Old Testament were fulfilled on the cross. And then it says that the king's couriers took the message, the edict, in a hurry with urgency, right? Well, what are we to do? We now have a new edict. We have the New Testament, where we just read that it was fulfilled on the law. We too should live with an urgency to go and tell. We said if it matters how we live our lives, well, that's a big part of how we live our lives. We should live our lives in such a way that they match what we say we believe, but then we should also go and tell when given the opportunity. We need to be ready. We should have an urgency in that people need to know. These people rode with an urgency because they had news for the Jews that they needed to know. Well, we need to live with urgency, knowing that we go to all people with news that they need to know. As we in chapter 8, let's finish verses 15 through 17. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. So let's touch on that last part. Many people from the country declared themselves Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen on them. There's some different takes on this. Some say that these were actual conversions, that they came to believe in the God of the Jews, and they became religiously Jews. Some say that they were actually just afraid of the Jews, and so they pretended, they called themselves Jews. Or maybe because Mordecai was now in a position of power, they were afraid of Mordecai, and so they just said, yeah, I believe what the Jews believe. Okay? We're not given any insight as to which one is true. It just says that many peoples from the country declared themselves Jews. So perhaps they did become true believers in the one true God. Right? But there's different takes on that. Right? But think of the difference here. In chapter 3, when Haman issued his edict, it said that the city of Susa was in confusion. And then it said Mordecai is in ashcloth grieving over what was about to happen. But now what does it say? It says they rejoice. They had light and gladness and joy and honor. There was gladness and joy among them, a feast and a holiday. So there's a completely different reaction to this news versus when they got the news of chapter 3. They were distraught in chapter 3. Now they're glad and have joy. Okay? But they're looking forward to a day that's coming in the future. They still have work to do to prepare, right? In 8 months, they have to defend themselves. They have to prepare for that day. But in the same way, like we have news, like we should live with joy and gladness and in light and rejoicing because of the news we've received. But as we go and we don't wait to live that way. Does that make sense? There is work to be done as we prepare for the day when we'll see our Savior face to face. But John 10:10 applies now. I've came that they may have life and have it abundantly. We don't need to wait to have that abundant life. The Jews didn't wait to celebrate until the day came. We have that abundant life now. We live that way now, right? And then we go out and we actually put our faith into practice and we act like how we live matters, because it does. But take to heart that abundant life starts now if you're a believer. Right? Don't wait until you come face to face to act like you can have joy and gladness of heart. It starts now because we have a good God who's in control and he's sovereign, right? And somehow he works things out for good. Right? But if there's a takeaway for me personally that I was to take from this, it would be the way I live matters, and I need to live a life that honors God. Let's pray as we close. God, thank you for your word. God, thank you that whenever we read it, it accomplishes its task. God, I pray that we would just let it sink into us, God, that it would take root in our lives, that it would affect us. God, spur us on to live lives that honor you. God, help us to understand that every day the way we live matters because people are looking at us and we need to be a reflection of you. God, we should be a light pointing others to you. God, the way we have interactions, whether they're big or small, God, the way we respond to others, just always help us keep that in the forefront of our minds, that we're a reflection of you. In your name I pray, amen.